Hello everyone, Warami, welcome. Thanks for joining me for the last of our Animal in the Houses talks that explore the connections with animals across our museums and collections. I'm Anna Kosu, the curator of the How to Move a Zoo exhibition now showing at the Museum of Sydney. I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal country, where I'm lucky enough to live and work. In the spirit of reconciliation, Sydney Living Museums acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening in today. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by my colleague, Mel Flyte. Mel is an assistant curator with Sydney Living Museums, working primarily within the House Museums portfolio. She had a background in art history and theory and has studied artistic movements from the Renaissance through to the 20th century, with a particular interest in late 19th century art and design movements. She is interested in collections care and preventative conservation and enjoys being hands-on with the wide range of objects in our collections. In 2019, she curated the exhibition On the Move at the Museum of Sydney and more recently worked with Gerwin Davies on his exhibition Iridescent, which is also now showing at the Museum of Sydney. If you have any questions for Mel, please pop them into the chat, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Mel. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Anna. All right, everyone, let's get started. I'll just share my screen. And we can have a look. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today to hear about Queen Victoria's pet portraits. But to understand how Victoria impacted the tradition of animals in art, I'd like to take you on a very quick gallop through the history of animals in art. It's a vast topic. Animals appear in art since the very first communities of humans captured their world in drawings. For millennia, humans have had a deep connection with animals, and this connection has been depicted in every culture across every period of human history. Animal depictions increased in the 19th century, particularly in Britain, where they appeared everywhere, including in people's homes, as art became more affordable and widely available. Sydney Living Museums is custodian to several house museums, including Vaucluse House, Elizabeth Bay House and Rouse Hill House, which reveal daily life for middle-class Antipodean families in the mid-19th century, including how they ornamented and decorated their homes. If, like me, when you visit these houses, you are drawn to the artworks on the walls, you'll come across many depictions of animals. But what does their appearance mean? How can we read these works of art to get a sense of what they meant for their original audiences? The idea for this talk came from several engravings we have in the collections of our house museums. Mass-produced in the 19th century, engravings tended to be copies of paintings by well-known artists of the day, often works that had been displayed at the yearly Royal Academy exhibitions in London and were known to a broad middle-class audience through depictions and descriptions in newspapers, journals and periodicals. I'm particularly interested in several engravings in our houses of works by Sir Edwin Landseer. Landseer was a royal painter for Queen Victoria and became one of the most widely published and reproduced artists of the mid-19th century. His engravings were incredibly popular and became almost ubiquitous in the homes of middle-class families. We even see them advertised for sale in Australia. His popularity was largely to do with his royal connections, as well as his subject matter, which was almost exclusively of animals, and in particular, dogs. So how do we reach a point where a painter of dogs is one of the most widely recognised artists in the Western world? I'm going to come back to that question in a moment. Animals in art often had a meaning beyond simply a chance appearance in the corner of a painting of everyday life, but our ability as a viewer to read these meanings has changed over time and was often a skill contemporary with the creation of the artwork. Often, meaning was ascribed to symbols such as animals so that art could be didactic when large portions of society were illiterate. Think of Christian symbolism and the use of the lamb to signify Jesus. Animals could be anthropomorphized to act as gods, placing the natural world above that of humankind. They could be used metaphorically to stand for qualities or specific traits in humans, or to display human foibles and follies. Think of Aesop's fables. Sometimes the hidden meanings of animals are still understood by us today. When you see a lion, you automatically think king of the beasts and view him as a symbol of authority. I'm going to focus on two particular domesticated animals, the cat and the dog, and briefly look at how depictions of these two animals have changed in art over time and how we can read them in an image to understand their symbolism. This will also reveal why you're more likely to see depictions of dogs than cats in art. I'll finish in the 19th century exploring the role that Queen Victoria played in the creation of pet portraiture through the commissioning of specific depictions of her pets by Edwin Landseer, and what this said about changing attitudes to animals in general. There's no denying that dogs are our oldest friends. They've been domesticated for at least 14,000 years. Humans and dogs forged bonds through mutual benefit. We lived in similar ways and realised we could make use of dogs for tasks like hunting and guarding flocks. They begin to appear in prehistoric art in these roles. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, dogs appeared in hunting scenes, especially with royalty. In ancient Greek art, their role as companion is highlighted, although not always as a friendly sidekick. Cerberus, in the top left here, the three-headed hound of Hades, was the vicious guardian of the underworld, but companion he was nonetheless. From early on, there was an understanding that dogs in art were associated with loyalty, fidelity, and companionship, and this is a consistent theme when dogs appear throughout the centuries. In 1604, Karel van Mander, in his Handbook of Allegorical Personifications, an instructional book for artists, stated, "By the dog, one indicates fidelity, for the dog is the most faithful and never forgets a kindness shown to it." By the Middle Ages, dogs had very much become playthings for the aristocracy, especially for the favourite pastime of hunting. And it was the aristocracy who were producing art, so dogs naturally appeared in the scenes of hunting. But by the Renaissance, dogs also appear as status symbols. Superior hunting dogs are depicted as symbols of nobility, displaying the high status of their owners, and very much owned by men. In fact, this is around the time that two distinct categories of dog appear in art: the large hunting dogs of wealthy men and the small lap dogs of wealthy women and children, very much gendered based on their function. During the reign of Charles II in England, 1660 to 85, small dogs become acceptable as courtly pets, even for men, well, kings. Here we see the young Charles II with his favourite dogs, miniature spaniels, and they became top dog, hence the creation of the King Charles Spaniel. In the French court, images of pampered pooches proliferate. Louis XV had named portraits of his dogs painted, but they were all still hunting dogs. We see more and more images of ladies of the court depicted with their lap dogs too, essentially playthings for the elite. The theories of René Descartes did much to cement the notion that animals were just things for humans to use and enjoy. Descartes believed they essentially had no soul, something believed by Christianity for hundreds of years. Descartes posited that animals were merely mechanical creatures, automata who existed rather than experienced or thought like man. This belief became harder to maintain in the face of scientific evidence and a closer relationship with animals that evolved during the Age of Enlightenment and in a world swayed by the notions of romanticism. There was a growing curiosity in the natural world and a desire for classification and an attempt to understand behaviours. The availability of animals to study increased through private menageries and zoos. In art, animals could be put to use in depictions of the sublime power of nature, to suffuse the elements with emotion and induce sentiment. There's a shift in thinking and a realization that animals have souls and personalities and individuality. George Stubbs is probably the most successful at infusing his depictions of animals with both scientific accuracy based on close observation and the individuality of his subject matter to reveal its soul. As we enter the 19th century, dogs appear more and more imbued with human characteristics in depictions that demonstrate they could feel emotions just like humans. The evolution of dogs in art had moved from them being portrayed simply as useful working animals to status symbols and companions, and finally to beloved pets with personalities. Dogs gave artists the opportunity to present any goal in their work: subtle social commentaries, as models of love and fidelity, as examples of courage, or the subject of humour and high-minded human activities presented as parodies. But it was their attachment to humans and our attachment to them that was most commonly depicted in the 19th century, in art as well as poetry and stories. Okay, I want to do a quick skip through depictions of cats in Western art now as a contrast to the history of dogs in art. Before the 20th century, cats were rarely the main subject of artworks. In Egyptian art, cats initially appear as lion-headed deities, but by around 1000 BCE, depictions appear of cats that are closer to domestic cats, for indeed, the Egyptians had domesticated cats by this time. Cats were revered and seen as protectors of the pharaoh for their ability to kill cobras and mice, and they've never quite forgotten this. Cats appear infrequently in Greek and Roman art, probably an indication that the domestication of the cat had spread to Europe through Greece via Egypt, although Aristotle believed that a cat's small face betrayed its small mind. By the Middle Ages, however, the cat, when it does appear in art, which is still infrequently, its appearance usually has an underlying meaning or symbolism, for by this time, the association between cats and the devil had been established. Black cats were linked with witchcraft, as well as the inherent evilness of the feminine. This association came from the biblical story of Adam and Eve. Mankind's fall was the fault of Eve. Cats are included in depictions of the Garden of Eden as intruders. They hunt mice and do not live in harmony with other creatures. Their predatory instinct became associated with lust, adultery, and all things wicked that men like to blame on women for being temptresses. Cats, then, were used by artists to suggest the evil parts of humanity and the vices we often succumb to, especially the carnal ones. Okay, just a warning, the next one is a bit cheeky. Let's have a closer look at this page from the Berry Book of Hours. The page for February shows peasants warming their private parts by the fire. Very base behaviour from lowly types, and with a cat in attendance. It wasn't all bad for cats, but it was usually all about their connection with the feminine. Cats were often depicted playing with wool or string, a link to women's work such as spinning, hence spinsters. So the crazy cat lady trope has been around for a while. One thing that did play in cats' favour was their ability to catch mice, not biblical mice, but the vermin that were part of everyday life. Mice catcher was an important role, particularly during times of plague. So cats appear more and more in scenes of daily life, particularly in Dutch 17th century art. But don't think it's all meaningless. Cats stealing meat from kitchens was still sometimes a symbolic reference to flesh and carnality. And I'm pretty sure this is the same cat in every picture. Cats were becoming accepted as company for humans, but compare this to the status of dogs at the same stages. They do start to appear in scenes of children with kittens as playthings, but again, this sometimes had a hidden meaning, a reminder that children are foolish and often idle. This behaviour is okay for kids, but not for grown-ups. So it's a reminder to leave idle things behind in youth. And you can really see this in Judith Leister's painting, which is based on a Dutch motto, "He who plays with cats gets scratched." The young girl raises a finger in warning. The boy's childish game to catch a cat with an eel is just silly behaviour, and you can see that even the cat looks unimpressed. Now to French art, where cats most often symbolised carnality. In the frivolous and licentious court of the 18th century, the cat in art symbolised female sexuality and lust. And this symbolism reached its zenith in the works of Francois Boucher. Chat in French was slang for female genitalia. Boucher's placement of the cat between the open legs of the lady leave little doubt about its meaning. And the cat, coincidentally, is also playing with a ball of string. Let's have a look at one more highly symbolic use of a cat. Here, the cat reveals the identity of the sitter. This is the infamous Kitty Fisher. Get it? Kitty fishing. This is a portrait of the prominent British courtesan and celebrity, one of the first people to be famous for being famous. Kitty would always be fabulously dressed with hair and makeup done, and apparently she had no shame. She once even ate a £10 note in a sandwich for a dare. So not only has the cat been included to hint at Kitty's lascivious lifestyle, but also as a play on her name. It's not until the very end of the 19th century do we start to see the more mainstream use of cats in the lovable, somnolent way we're so familiar with today. Inspired by Japanese art, the cat starts to be depicted just as a cat, with no hidden meaning or symbolism, just because they're lovely. All right, let's jump back to the 19th century. In Britain, a change in the way animals were depicted coincided with a newfound obsession for selective breeding to produce pure bloodlines and prized specimens. This was a uniquely British obsession and resulted in the beginnings of the codification of what specific breeds looked like and what their main characteristics were. This was not just for horses and cows, but for dogs also. And so many of the dog breeds we know today were developed in the 19th century. Selective breeding ensured the best of the breed would be passed on and allowed for the publication of descriptions of pure breeds. A growing middle class with increased leisure time and disposable income had the time and resources to start to take an interest in breeds. And so we see the beginnings of animal shows and animal societies alongside the emergence of zoos for the enjoyment of more exotic species. How did this new obsession with animals and breeding manifest itself in art? Well, with the new obsession came a new desire for depictions of particular prized animals, the best of their species and bloodlines. So you can really see that in the works of William Henry Davis. Animals are depicted in British art more than any other European country in the 19th century. When it came to dogs, there was a growing desire to depict not just purebreds. The status of the genre of animal picture in the Victorian period changed enormously as the British also became obsessed with pet ownership. This was due in large part to Queen Victoria. Through her influence, dogs reached unprecedented levels of popularity. Victoria was an obsessive dog collector, owning 640 dogs of 30 different breeds during her lifetime. Often she would have 70 dogs at one time, which she kept at her Windsor Castle kennel. But more than examples of their breeds, she loved them as pets, as part of her family. No longer were they simply symbols of status, but now loving members of her household. Her cottage was full of depictions of her dogs, and she even had a window that overlooked the dog yard so she could watch them play. Through the works of Edwin Landseer, we start to see a new genre of pet portraiture in the sense of individual animals being depicted. And these works started to make the Queen more accessible to the general public. And we see this effect today. There was recently footage of Queen Elizabeth being interrupted by her dog Candy. And the commentary from the public was, "Oh, she's just like us. She talks to her dog." It was Victoria who really normalised the obsession with pets and gave regular people the ability to see royalty as just like the rest of us because of their shared passion with pet ownership. As I touched on before, dogs could be put to use by artists to elicit strong emotional responses from audiences who felt affection for these creatures. Tales of the heroism of dogs abounded in the 19th century. Fidelity since antiquity was the ennobling characteristic most associated with dogs, and it was Landseer who best put the emotional capabilities of dogs to use. Landseer was the son of an engraver and a precocious child with a natural affinity for animals. He began sketching farm animals at the age of 5 and by 12 was exhibiting. He was admitted to the Royal Academy schools at 14. As an adult, he was charming and personable, but a notorious social climber, and began moving in elite circles. His main achievement was his success in making depictions of animals worthy as subject matter for high art, a domain previously only available for grand historical scenes, religious themes, and portraiture. He created the genre of sentimental canine drama, and his career flourished as attitudes around animals changed in Britain. Landseer's patrons wanted portraits of their dogs, and none more so than Queen Victoria. She became aware of Landseer's ability to capture the individuality of dogs when she was given a portrait of her favourite spaniel, Dash, a gift from her mother, the Duchess of Kent. Soon afterwards, Landseer became the royal painter to the Queen, and she almost exclusively commissioned Landseer to paint images of her pets. She became enamoured with his works due to his ability to capture the very nature of the dog, and in 1850 he even received a knighthood for his services. Blackwood's magazine wrote of Landseer's dog paintings in 1840, "His are not mere animals, they tell a story. You see them not only alive, but you see their biography and know what they do, and if the expression be allowed, what they think." As Landseer produced more and more images of the Queen's pets, depictions of pets in general became an acceptable and fashionable subject matter, and one to aspire to. Hector, Nero, and Dash with the parrot Laurie depicts a group of Victoria's pets, including one of her parrots. Dash, her favourite, is given prime position on a velvet stool. Never before had dogs been placed in such luxurious settings surrounded by symbols of wealth. So while these pets were extremely pampered, these images were still relatable. Who wouldn't buy a velvet stool for their favourite pup? Here we see portraits of royal children, but they are also portraits of royal dogs, Eos and Dandy Dinmont. The dogs are depicted as trusted, loving members of the family, still fulfilling their role as guardian, but not of flocks, now as guardians of precious royal children. This is one of my favourite works by Landseer. Isn't it a glorious painting? This is a portrait of Eos, Prince Albert's favourite dog, that beautifully captures his fidelity. Eos was a greyhound, which, as we've seen, is an ancient breed frequently associated with nobility and royalty, and a traditional aristocratic hunting dog, but he is not depicted on the hunt. Landseer has portrayed Eos surrounded by the elaborate trappings of prestige and wealth, as well as the personal items of Albert, his glove, his cane, his hat, all signifiers of the prince. This work is like a portrait of the man without him being present, and speaks volumes of the importance of Eos to Albert. When Eos died at the age of 10 and a half, the Queen wrote of Albert's sadness as being quite like losing a friend, and work such as this would have provided great solace for the family. So now I'd like to return to the paintings of which we have engravings in our collections. This one from Vaucluse House. The original image is known as Windsor Castle in modern times, and it depicts an imaginary scene of life from the castle based on the traditional conversation piece, a scene of a group or family engaged in conversation in an informal setting. This work is full of symbolism, of domestic happiness and bliss, and portrayed the British ideal of hearth and home as the centre of life, with Queen Victoria becoming the exemplar of domesticity. We see Albert, just returned from the hunt with the spoils of his trip, pheasant, mallard, jay, and a halcyon kingfisher. He has obviously been accompanied by his hunting dog, who is being given praise for his help. We can recognise the dog as Eos. 3 other royal dogs are depicted: Dandy Dinmont, licking the prince's hand affectionately, Islay, begging towards the Queen. He was apparently top of all her dogs, and Kernak, intently watching the Princess Victoria, their eldest child, as she inspects the kingfisher, a symbol of peace. The dogs are depicted in as much detail as the figures, and play an integral part in this scene of domesticity and family rather than royalty. These are relatable people, a happy family full of love. Albert, in the traditional aristocratic male role of huntsman, espousing all the benefits of country life, is also a husband and father. Victoria holds a posy of flowers to show her femininity and wifeliness. She is, however, depicted standing to ensure she remains higher than Albert and therefore superior in status. She is not simply a signifier of feminine virtue, but she may be his wife, but she's also his queen. When the work was completed in 1845, both Eos and Dandy had passed away, so it became a tribute to the dogs as well as a family portrait. Victoria thought it beautiful and hung it in the white drawing room at Windsor Castle her whole life. The public saw it as regal and yet relatable, a new way of depicting the royal family that the public could emulate. An engraving of this image, The Connoisseurs, hangs in Rouse Hill House. This is a self-portrait of Landseer, which speaks volumes about his preferred company. His dog Lassie and a friend's dog Myrtle are given the task of commenting on his work. Landseer felt untutored critics were better than tutored ones, and he certainly preferred the company of dogs. Later in life, he suffered from declining mental health and became more reclusive, spending time in his studio with his pets. So how do we end up with engravings of Landseers in our collections? As I mentioned, Landseer was the most popular artist of the Victorian era, the most famous living artist of his day, fetching over £1,000 for his works. But his popularity was also amongst the middle class. They saw their own emotions through Landseer's humanised animals. His images told stories, communicated drama and feelings. Newly literate and educated city dwellers were eager for forms of art that were affordable and available. Improvements in printing technology meant that there was a wider awareness of contemporary art through the mass production of journals and newspapers, a new age of mass media. Reproductions of artworks was the means by which most of the population now consumed art. Printed reproductions were seen not just as mementos of an admired painting, but as an original artwork that could be owned by many, and ranged in value based on their production technique, the quality of the paper, whether hand-coloured or signed by the artist. Landseer's works were transformed into engravings by his brother Thomas, but Edwin ensured their quality and closeness to the original with touch-ups and oversight of his brother's work. Landseer's obituary in 1873 stated, "No painter of animal life can for a moment be compared to him for intelligent invention, for humour and its congenial pathos, for breadth, variety and subtlety of observation. No painter has ever so widened and deepened our sympathies with the dumb creatures that minister so largely to our pleasures and necessities." And how much did Landseer and the Queen affect middle-class tastes? I'll finish by showing this portrait of 3 Wentworth daughters, which hangs in Vaucluse House. These 3 unmarried daughters of William Charles Wentworth were painted to show their marriageability in this portrait of 1868, painted in England by a relatively unknown Austrian painter, Hans Julius Gruder. But look at the inclusion of the dog, faithful pet, symbol of fidelity, in a family portrait, in the tradition of the Queen herself, depicted in this middle-class Antipodean family. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mel. That was fantastic on a rainy afternoon. I couldn't think of a better way of spending my afternoon looking at all those glorious images of animals. Everyone for joining us. That's the last in our series of Animal in Our Houses. Our next members event will be actually a live in-person talk held at the Museum of Sydney on the 23rd of March, where our fabulous 2D and 3D designers will be talking about the sort of creative process behind the creation of How to Move a Zoo. I hope you can join us then. For more information, go to our website, or the link has just been put in the chat. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you.